Not sure if you've noticed, but we here at What Happened tend to play by our own rules, dance to the beat of our own drummer, and buck the trends that others often succumb to. So I just thought, why don't I talk about the long and protracted development of the most recent Final Fantasy game right now? No other reason. Oh, and Max is here too!
Hi!
'Cause of course he is. So slot in your materia, grab your Buster Sword, and just leave Kate Sith sitting in its own filth, please. It's time to find out what happened with the Final Fantasy VII Remake. If you're like me, and I know I am, the majority of your knowledge about Final Fantasy XIII, stay with me on this, was that it existed. But did you know that the original plan was for it to release on the PS2? See, Square Enix were hitting it out of the park on Sony's second smash hit console, which most attribute to the success of just one title.
The Bouncer!
So, the team that built FF10 and 10-2 started prototyping the next fantasy, while a completely separate group finished up on FF12. Come late 2004, that FF10 team received an emergency order and would need to stop all work and focus on delivering a playable, but very brief demo of what a Final Fantasy game would look like running on the upcoming PlayStation Triple Ballin'. This was because Sony had their E3 2005 press conference coming up.
It's Ridge Racer! Ridge Racer!
No, not that one. And they needed to wow the press. The team then spent the following 6 months crafting something that would impress, and to get the easiest, cheapest pop possible, it was decided to model the demo after Final Fantasy VII, which was kind of a popular one. It was never intended to indicate a full remake, but rather just be a fun thing to piggyback off the reminiscence of Final Fantasy VII project, which culminated, of course, into the flawless tour de force that was Dirge of Cerberus.
The power of love turned into a beam. Yeah! Oh my god, dude, this is trash. You promised me you wouldn't use that clip.
Anyway, when Final Fantasy VII technical demo for PlayStation 3 was heralded as the far and away best thing about Sony's E3 conference, the team were pretty jazzed, and now fairly accustomed to the hardware, so they immediately moved their next project over to Sony's HD George Foreman grill, and that then became Final Fantasy XIII as we know it, which I'll need to down a few high potions before I ever talk about. During this time, Square Enix were quick to reiterate that there was no Final Fantasy VII Remake in production, and that the technical demo was just that, a demo to show off the PS3 hardware. This is not dissimilar to the Space World 2000 demo of The Legend of Zelda, and much like that, fans wouldn't stop bemoaning and lamenting for what could have been. This fan desire continued throughout the release of pretty much every Final Fantasy title from then on out, but was exacerbated even further with 2008's Crisis Core. Once the credits finished rolling, players were presented with the simple message to be continued in Final Fantasy VII, and these flames were fanned even further with a fraudulent Best Buy listing, stating that a 7 remake was on its way later that year, which it very clearly wasn't. But let's say it's 2008, and let's say we're going to apply common sense. Crisis Core was a prequel, so this was simply a cheeky way to link the two stories together. Nothing more, nothing less. Regardless, speculation kept dogging the Final Fantasy higher-ups, especially Tatsuya Nomura and Yoshinori Kitase for years. As we moved into 2010 and beyond, remakes and remasters became the style at the time, which only increased the pressure for Square to announce something. Eventually, Kitase decided to address the issue when he was asked if he regretted the PS3 technical demo and how it continually kept rumors alive over all these years. It was the right thing to do at the time, he said rather frankly. Later on, in a 2014 interview with Eurogamer, he addressed new rumors that Square Enix did indeed have an FF7 remake in production. I can honestly tell you I would love to do that. If you simply ask me if I personally would like to do that, yes I would, definitely. There's no lie about it. But you must believe me when I say it would take a lot, proper budget, team size, and resources to happen. It would have to be the biggest project I've done, my life's work, so I would have to be as highly motivated as that to end up with something I'm very happy with. It's a huge thing for me. So while that elegantly avoided confirming anything, one way or another, all that changed in 2015 when Square Enix finally announced that they are bringing Final Fantasy Type 0 HD to the PS4 and Xbox One.
God damn you! God damn you all!
But then all of that changed later on in 2015. 10 years after the technical demo was first shown, it was now official. A Final Fantasy VII Remake was officially coming to the PS4.
Home free, Red!
I wouldn't celebrate just yet.
Now, for ages, Square Enix had said this was nigh impossible because of the way the 1997 classic was made. Hundreds of unique, computer-generated images that made up the land of Midgar, all of which would need to be remade in full 3D. Not to mention, they'd have to recreate dozens of characters, boss fights, rewrite a massive script, and choreograph new cutscenes to be in line with the flashy style Final Fantasy had adopted over the decades. Taking on a project this huge would need to happen concurrently to Square Enix's slate, pushing forward with new titles like Final Fantasy 15, 14, Kingdom Hearts 3, and on top of them all, The Quiet Man. So while there was certainly gil to make off of fans who were willing to buy a game they've beaten dozens of times before,
Like me.
like him, they didn't want to interrupt or suspend all their other important projects just to remake an old one. Taking 6 months out to make the Final Fantasy VII technical demo for the PS3 shifted the development of FF13, and ultimately wound up making that game a lot more expensive to produce than originally intended, something Square Enix wanted to avoid if they could help it. So, for this to even be possible, they would need outside help, and for reasons not exactly clear, they chose CyberConnect 2, which some of you might know from literally dozens of Naruto and hack games, Eyes of Heaven, and of course, one of Capcom's most costly sales disasters of all time, Asura's Wrath.
Hey! Whoa, dude.
Dude, I'm not talking about its quality, man. It sold abysmally bad in the West and in Japan. That's all I meant. Okay, so whereas he served as the character designer on the original game, Nomura was now in the directing chair, with Kitase producing. Nomura outlined pretty early and clearly what Square Enix was hoping to achieve here, updating the gameplay to modern standards, adding in new dialogue, quests, characters, and cutscenes, all while still invoking the spirit of 1997. My goal with the remake is to make it apply to the current era, the current generation of players that are going to be coming into contact with or playing FF7 for the first time through this remake. I want to make it so it's relevant to the modern era, as well as having an element of surprise. It has to be something that riles up this sense of wonder and amazement. I don't want to change it so much that it's unrecognizable, but make sure that it's something fresh and new, yet still recognizable as Final Fantasy VII. That's what I'll be keeping in mind as I work on this. So while these key figureheads would be overseeing the project, CyberConnect 2 would be delivering the bulk of the work, along with smaller other outside collaborators, in addition to support by Square themselves. But then, this is where the story takes a sudden turn.
Buried in a 2015 article on Gematsu, which translated a Famitsu interview, Kotatsu was hinting that even in this early stage, there was some friction. It has become a common production technique to collaborate with a number of companies. He compliments CyberConnect 2 for their action game experience and know-how, as well as video production. However, Square Enix is keeping a close eye on CyberConnect 2, as their production tastes differ from that of Square Enix. Nomura was annoyed by the direction of the new trailer, so Square Enix brought it closer to the company's style. So, coincidentally, for the next 2 years, news on the remake started to dry up, and when it finally did come, well, a lot of people were concerned. In 2017, an official Square Enix press release announced that CyberConnect was no longer working on the project, and spun it, saying that their services were simply no longer needed, with the truth, of course, being far more dire. Allegedly, Nomura was unsatisfied by the content he was shown after a visit, so the development was shifted back to Square Enix proper, and all the work that had been done up to that point was scrapped. Naoki Hamaguchi, the main programmer of Lightning Returns Final Fantasy XIII and project lead on Mobius Final Fantasy, was quickly slotted in as a co-director. Now, Nomura is known for his strong artistic vision, taking his time on certain projects and wanting everything to be just so. Whatever CyberConnect had delivered was simply not up to his standards, and in terms of specifics, it's never really been revealed just what CyberConnect did that caused them to get booted off the project. Japanese game developers tend to never spill the tea, and even Naoki Hamaguchi himself would only speak of this sudden change with mild vagaries such as, well, as for the whole story, it's a sensitive topic, but until now, development was moving forward with external cooperation, but the company had decided to shift to an internal setup, including mass production and quality, because we want to control everything, including quality, on a stable schedule. So, with Nomura being less than pleased, the relationship between CyberConnect and Square becoming frosty, where did all these small details come from? Well, this leads us to the more mysterious part of the story. A person by the name of Dan Tsukasa, who seemed to have some type of professional relationship with Square, was quoted in an article in CGM Online and made some fairly frank statements on CyberConnect's work. Within Square, it was seemed as unusable and useless, and felt it would simply take too long for it to be remade or corrected. So instead, they would start it over from scratch. When pressed for further details, Tsukasa offered, "I can't get into any issues by saying what I've heard or what's common knowledge in the industry here, the common knowledge being that the project was taken from CyberConnect 2 because it was so behind schedule. But if I were to name anyone working here, they'd get into trouble for sharing information, the same way I'd get into trouble if I shared information about where I work." Then Dan Tsukasa vanished from the internet, his social media and other accounts just meteored off the earth. At the end of the day, a studio suddenly being yanked off its original duties on a project is never a good thing, no matter how you slice it. While CyberConnect still retains a credit in the final game, there was, however, one other thing that remained constant. Even when the remake was first announced, it was always envisioned as a multi-part title, and while there was certainly some fan grumbling about this in the long run, it was absolutely the safest choice. In reality, the time and money needed to remake the game in one singular giant release would have resulted in cutting specific areas, events, or quest lines out of the game, something Nomura directly cited as a worry. Of course, in terms of making money, it was also the better choice, as you could then charge players a few times to experience the whole story, and maybe even release a multi-disc Ultimate Complete Edition later on for fans like me.
Like you!
Honestly, it's these decisions that save the whole project. Typically, when there's a developer switch, it's a 50-50 shot on whether it comes out at all, but Square Enix knew this was such an anticipated remake, having it not come out wasn't a realistic option. Over the next 3 years, small updates would trickle out of the revealed concept art, locations, as well as new character designs. It was pretty clear that the remake was taking visual cues from Advent Children, as Nomura's feature film debut provided a ton of reference material the team could draw from. Usually this concepting phase, where you need to take designs that look like this and then turn them into this, can take quite a while. But since Square had already done a lot of legwork for Advent Children, it was probably quite a boon to getting the project back on track. It unfortunately wasn't all smooth highwind sailing from there though. Some fans begrudged the change to a more action-oriented style in terms of combat, which was obviously lifted from Final Fantasy XV, but it was probably another key decision that led to the game coming out in a timely manner. Despite this, the remake was hit with a last-minute delay from March 3rd to April 10th, with Kitase saying, "In order to ensure we deliver a game that is in line with our vision and the quality that our fans who have been waiting for deserve, we have decided to move the release date to April 10th, 2020. Now, for a delay of just over a month, taking into account physical and manufacturing times, in line with their vision was just PR speak for there's some bugs. Thusly, they needed a few extra weeks to iron them out, although obviously a few minor ones were left in. That goddamn door. Even in the days leading up to the release, there were still some issues. Around March 23rd, some pre-order copies were reportedly out in the wild and arriving early, which threw a lot of people for a loop. This was later confirmed in March 30th statement from the development staff, citing a patchwork of shipment restrictions imposed by quarantine regulations, resulting in some confusion which left an undisclosed amount of copies slip through. Square even publicly put out a press release, asking people to not share footage of the game before the official release. And considering whatever happened to Dan Tsukasa, you don't want to piss off the Square Enix ninjas.
Wutai is not to be trifled with!
Fortunately, despite all the setbacks and uncertainty, when the Final Fantasy VII Remake retail game for PlayStation 4 finally did release, it was a global success, selling 3.5 million copies in its first 3 days, which placed it alongside similar big hitters like Spider-Man and God of War. Considering all the potential pitfalls, the massive amount of anticipation and hype, and the technically 15-year-long development time, the remake was absolutely worth the wait in the end, which, considering the history of this show, is a very rare thing indeed. Alright, so, Maximilian.
Matthew?
Thanks for being on the show.
You're welcome, and I still don't forgive you for introducing me to Criticom.
Oh.
And if you want to check out my channel, I'm Maximilian Dude on YouTube, as well as Maximilian_Dude on Twitch.
Fantastic, and if you out there know of any other arduous RPG anomalies, shout them out in the comments below, over on my Twitter, or take an airship ride over to the Flophouse VIP Patreon and become a big boss and nominate what I'll be covering in a future episode. See you next time, and thanks for watching.